Donald Trump has won most of his fights as it pertains to the border with the U.S. and Mexico. The Migrant Protection Protocols, also known as Remain in Mexico, stood for quite a while until recently a court shot it down. And in response, Donald Trump is sending 160 troops to the southern border over fears that migrants may try to rush inside. And if they do, they can stay while their asylum is being processed. Let's read the story from BuzzFeed News. They report the Trump administration is sending 160 active duty personnel to the southern border in light of a recent court ruling preventing the government from making immigrants wait in Mexico. Senior Customs and Border Protection officials said they are sending 80 soldiers to El Paso, Texas, and another 80 to San Diego to support officers at official border crossings there. Officials also said they were sending soldiers there due to increasing coronavirus concerns. And as you know, simply by saying that word, we're demonetized. But let's read on. On Friday of last week, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals temporarily blocked the Trump administration's Remain in Mexico policy, which has sent back nearly 60,000 immigrants from the U.S. border and forced them to wait in Mexico while their cases are being completed, though later the same day it suspended its order. Okay, so this is weird. So it's not being blocked, I guess. But it is also important to note, since the implementation of the Remain in Mexico policy, many of these migrants have not in fact remained in Mexico. They've actually gone back home to Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, etc., because they didn't want to wait in Mexico. I also think it's fair to note that when given the opportunity to seek asylum in Mexico, many of them went back home to their countries or just outright said no and tried to come to the United States. BuzzFeed reports in between the two court actions, immigrants presented themselves at official border crossings, sometimes in large groups, to ask the border officials to take them out of the policy, officially known as the Migrant Protection Protocols. Following the initial ruling, in the Mexican city of Ciudad Juarez, CBP responded by shutting down a port of entry, and officers temporarily shut down a bridge in Brownsville, Texas. Quote, immediately upon the decision from the Ninth Circuit Court enjoining MPP, we had large groups of mass that causes instant port closures and disruption of port operations, and therefore we have had a prepared response in the event that the decision comes down again or any clarifying court decision that could disrupt port entry operations, a senior CBP official said. CBP ports of entry are not designed or equipped to handle extremely large groups of travelers arriving at the same time. Now, in the past, in San Diego, and I believe also in El Paso, where they are now, there have been groups of migrants rushing the border, throwing rocks, and trying to shove border guards out of the way. We've seen, I think it was in El Paso, I could be wrong, they had plastic shields holding off the migrants trying to rush into the United States. Over in Europe, we have seen these viral videos. So this problem has been affecting many different countries where many people form massive groups and storm the ports of entry and rush into the U.S., breaking through the barriers. So let's read on. They say earlier this week, the Ninth Circuit Court said it would block the Trump administration's Remain in Mexico policy, saying it would causing extreme and irreversible harm. The policy is in place across the entire border. However, the Ninth Circuit said its injunction against the policy, allowing it to continue until March 11th, pending a possible review by the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court doesn't take up the administration's appeal, the Ninth Circuit Court injunction will take effect March 12th, but only in California and Arizona, where the court has jurisdiction. CBP officials said they were sending soldiers to Texas despite the ruling not affecting the state because they were worried large groups of immigrants would try to force their way into the U.S. On Friday, when the same appeals court said MPP wasn't legal, a group of roughly 150 asylum seekers gathered on the Ciudad Juarez side of the El Paso del Norte Bridge, which connects to El Paso. CBP shut down the bridge in response. Officials said they are also sending active duty personnel to San Diego because of their history there. Quote, it's a quote history. They were referring to the time a caravan of immigrants tried to enter the U.S. in 2018 and were repelled by tear gas fired by Border Patrol into Mexico to stop them. They say the group of 160 will be made up of military, police, engineers, and personnel providing aviation support. They will not be enforcing immigration laws, officials said. The soldiers are expected to be in place no later than Saturday. So we actually have the story here. Federal judges have stopped their own ruling that blocked the Trump administration from forcing immigrants to wait in Mexico. This is all very confusing, I must say, that the official order and then reversal was about a week ago. I actually missed this one. I didn't realize they had reversed the order. Now, a lot of people are questioning the Remain in Mexico policy, but I do not believe, at least in my opinion, the left has presented a cogent, cohesive argument as to why it makes sense that anyone can come to America, claim to be an asylum seeker, and then actually just stay here. The problem being, of course, as many of you know, once they claim asylum and we tell them to wait, they just disappear. I don't know what the end game is for many of these Democrats. And it feels to me, well, actually, I'll do this as an addendum to the segment I did earlier today. Maybe you saw my video talking about the hypocrisy of Elizabeth Warren and the feminist Democrats who are claiming that they're being held back by sexism. We can see that there is no principle behind what they're advocating in terms of open borders. And I say open borders, what I mean is the various policies that lead to an open borders circumstance. They claim they want benefits for everyone, but because they also simultaneously argue that people should be allowed to cross the border and it should be legal, this to me is mind-numbing and makes literally no sense. They've effectively created a policy where you can enter the U.S. completely legally from anywhere, even if it means wandering through the desert for 90 plus miles or more, and then seek free healthcare, government benefits, school. None of that makes sense. There used to be principles on the left, and I know, shocking to a lot of people, but it's true. Bernie Sanders, for instance, flip-flopped recently. Joe Biden, for instance, flip-flopped recently. To me, it doesn't seem to make sense. I don't know whose vote they're trying to court when they're advocating for people who aren't citizens, who can't vote, who have no access to benefits, and in many circumstances aren't actually paying taxes. Now, I know many people argue that they do, in fact, pay taxes. Many do. Many are essentially operating within our economy, because I think the number, depending on who you ask, it could be like, 10 to 20 million or whatever, whichever institution is tracking these numbers. We do have people working and doing these things. But when you add the summation, when you take the sum of all of the things advocated for by the Democrats, they're essentially saying they want a serf class of people. And I know I've brought this up many times, but it does bear repeating. I don't understand what their argument is against the migrant protection protocols. How is it causing harm when we have people, most of which, as we know statistically, will not qualify for asylum? Why aren't we taking that into account when we're talking about the policies we have for people seeking people seeking refuge, or people who are asylum or refuge? If we know that the overwhelming majority of people who come to this country don't in fact qualify, shouldn't we then err on the side of they aren't going to qualify? Why would it make sense for us as taxpayers to put all of our money into this pool of cash knowing it's a waste? It wouldn't make sense in any other circumstance. If imagine if someone asked you to set aside a volcano insurance fund. I'm obviously making a Family Guy reference. Well, the likelihood that a volcano erupts in your area is astronomically low. Why would you set aside money for that and actually spend it? Or actually, the joke is from The Simpsons, where they created Bear Patrol. I don't know if you remember this episode, but one day a bear wanders into Springfield, so they spend all of this money on Bear Patrol. This was the left, basically, in the 90s and 2000s, mocking the ideas of wasted money because people were too stupid. Volcano insurance and Family Guy circumstance, Bear Patrol. Well, the likelihood of bear wanders in your neighborhood actually exists. But does it make sense to spend money on a bear service system simply because once every 5 years something like this happens? Imagine if Chicago created Deer Patrol because sometimes deer wanders downtown. It wouldn't make sense. So if we know that for the most part, the people seeking asylum don't actually qualify, should we actually be allocating resources towards the problem of accommodating asylum seekers in this country en masse? I don't know. I think the answer is overwhelmingly no. So now we're seeing the response. Donald Trump is sending troops down. I don't like that either, man. This is what really bothers me. I talked about this in the video I did the other day on Trump's nuclear option on immigration. While I understand why Trump is sending out ICE, sending out Border Patrol, it seems like a problem that's just going. I look at it this way. You ever see a van fishtail, like a car pulling a tractor, or pulling a trailer, so it's fishtailing? The wobble is a little bit. The wobble gets worse and worse and worse, and then it flips over and spins out of control. I think that's where we're heading. If the Democrats keep advocating for weaker and weaker border security, And then the response from Donald Trump is to increase border immigration enforcement. You know where it's going. You've got the Democrats saying decriminalize moratorium. They're just getting more and more extreme for seemingly no reason. And then the response from the federal government, ICE, DHS, CBP, whatever, is elite border agents, mass surveillance. Neither of these things are good things. Now, I got to admit, we have to hold them each individually responsible to various degrees, but the buck has to stop with what they're ruling in terms of just spending taxpayer money and not caring that you have children walking through the desert. It's all paradoxical, man. It's hypocritical. That's what it is. It's a hypocritical position. They show these photos of drowned migrants and say, oh no, heavens me. And then what do? Advocate for these people to keep doing it. It literally makes no sense. And I'll end with this point I made the other day. How does it make sense that you're going to have sanctuary cities not deporting repeat criminals? How does it make sense that America is going to pay to imprison an illegal immigrant instead of just deporting them? Wouldn't they prefer that? I don't know, man. I guess American prison is better from where they came from, I guess. But why are we paying? This doesn't make sense. I'll leave it there. Stick around. Next segment's coming up in a few minutes, and I will see you all shortly.